Thank you, Rick, and thank you all for being here. I am going to time myself, sorry. My name is Althea. I work with the privacy and scaling team at Ethereum Foundation, and Rick has very graciously tried to take the fall for the delay, but it was kind of my fault. There's a lot of pictures in this presentation. But I think, to me, that's very important because this is all kind of about how we think about privacy, the stories that we tell ourselves, the narratives that we have around it, and looking at kind of both narratives and imagery tells us a lot about the landscape that we're working in and also kind of what we're connecting to, what we value in this emerging space. So, before we talk about why privacy matters, what is it even? You find that privacy is not a particularly well-defined concept. It kind of means different things to different people. What do you mean when you say that you work on privacy technology? And then what do other people hear? Depending on people's cultures, people's values, what they've seen, what they've been taught, what they need, what they want. It can mean very different things. In kind of common usage, it is pretty strongly associated with secrecy, with hiding, with isolation. It's antisocial. It is literally the opposite of society, according to dictionary.com. It's interesting to look at that distinction, though, between private and public, and how the internet has really brought the private and public spheres together in a way that is pretty unprecedented and maybe not particularly conducive to human life. It's not as simple as individual and state anymore. The physical world has natural gradations. Maybe you have your bedroom and your house and your apartment building, your yard, your neighborhood, your city, your country, the whole world, space, and you have a general sense of who is in each of those places and where the boundaries are and the context for the choices that you make. In the online world, the difference between public and private is both much more binary and much less clear. And in this poorly defined space, we're isolated, we're flattened, we're dissociated, we're sort of out of phase. And we cling to our devices as our conduit to the world, but we're constantly wary. And this is the difference between being in a space that belongs to you and a space that belongs to someone else, a space full of strangers, full of unknowns. So privacy comes to mean shutting yourself in, locking people out, securing your valuables, hiding things that could be used against you, masks and hoods, and allusions to violation and violence. And whether you're a villain or a potential victim, you need privacy because you've got something to hide. And the choice not to share is actually regarded with suspicion, because as much as we complain about all of this, as wary as we are of it, we also rely on it to validate our shared reality. Because we are what we share, right? We're our feeds, we are our metrics, and our location history, and our contacts, and our stats, and our purchases, and our scores. Our data is our identity. And your identity is priceless, of course, but people are also constantly coming up with ways to put a price tag on it, to atomize it, and analyze it, and quantify it. And maybe this is just the way computers record and process information. It's logical, it needs definitions and statements, but it's also a product of the way that the internet has been architected and incentivized. It relies on turning people into consumers and products. It needs us to be predictable. But it's the price of being connected, right? So you just have to set your boundaries. You have to trust the right people and exercise caution and toggle the toggles and set the settings and uncheck the boxes and block the pop-ups and turn off the widgets and don't allow the cookies and refuse to help them improve and decline the personalized experience and put special characters in our passwords, and then we can have all the conveniences of the modern world at our fingertips. So how is that actually going? Well, it turns out people really want all of that information for all kinds of reasons. And the bad guys are sometimes better at getting it than the good guys are at keeping it safe. And then sometimes it's not really clear who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. And of course, when the so-called good guys do bad things, they have to be held accountable. We have to regulate, we have to make rules. But it's not really a fight about whether we should be collecting and using this information. It's about who has a right to do the collecting and what it should be used for and what it should be used against. And the thing is, it doesn't really matter what side you think you're on or where you set your boundaries, because it's just happening on all the sides, and your boundaries are really just suggestions. And once somebody decides that they want to know everything about everyone, everywhere, it's just right there. And it's so powerful, and there's no exit. But some of these guys, they're willing to stand up for your right to decide what happens with your information. And even when it might not be the most politically correct thing to do, they value your privacy above all else, except when they don't. Because you have to help the good guys protect people from the bad guys, right? And then sometimes the bad guys are the same guys, and now we're just back where we started. And then we have the guys who make their whole business model on offering you protection from all the other guys. And it's almost like building a vast repository of detailed personal information about everyone on Earth is an invitation for people to do weird stuff. And what if we just didn't? What if we didn't accept that this is the only way that we can achieve trust or convenience or connection or safety? What if we started from the premise that systems should be built around what humans need and how humans work? Where what I think and do and experience is only known to me, and I can share it when I want to, and I can prove it when I need to. What if I could choose, like really choose who to trust, and with what, and for what purpose, and when? And what if I could take that trust back when it turns out not to have been earned? What if my expression could be dynamic, responsive to changes in my environment? What if I could be more or less known depending on what I know about who's watching? Because privacy isn't really about hiding, as Rick said. It's about having a safe place from which to emerge. In A Crisis in Education, Hannah Arendt talks about the intrusion of public into private life and how limiting that can be to the growth of children in particular. She describes children as being in a state of becoming, but I think that's true for all of us to some extent throughout our lives, or at least it should be. But when private and public overlap too much, we lose access to this state. We become flattened, we become productized. We externalize the ability to tell our own stories or figure out how they interweave with others. So, to some extent, privacy just feels like a state of nature, right? And there's this sense of sort of things in motion, growing, opening up, taking off, whether it's putting down roots or taking flight or leaping out of a hole to high-five your friends. We're seeking this freedom to move between states and to grow in ways that are more organic and less constrained, to be both sheltered and expansive. And that's so important, not just for individuals, but for relationships and communities and societies. In the place where public and private intersect, that's where really interesting stuff happens, right? The endless connectivity of the net that lets us connect across all boundaries with people we know and people we don't know. And it opens up crazy possibilities, both good and bad. And you need the boring quantitative stuff. You need to measure things, you need contracts, property, voting, proof of individual. This stuff is all really essential to a functioning society, and it needs to be stronger the less people are known to each other in a given space. But there also needs to be space for other kinds of interactions. People also need to be able to take different roles and step in and out of the public domain. This quote, I think, sums this up really nicely, that privacy is necessary for both individual and community. You can't participate meaningfully in public life if you don't have the foundation for security in your private life. Honesty and creativity and discovery and experimentation, generosity, all these very human things, they require this gradation between total isolation and total visibility. The way that you behave on a stage with cameras pointing at you is different from a small group of people that you know and trust. And I'm not up here lying to you, right? But if I was having this conversation with one of you one-on-one, I would just be in a different mode. And it's partly this sort of shifting of context, but it's also, I think, knowing that the only record is the imperfect memories of the people around you and the way that they interpret you, the way that they understand what you say. And that's so different from putting something in a place where it's going to be recorded with perfect fidelity for all time, for whoever happens upon it. So you're not necessarily less honest in a place like that, but you're more guarded, you're less exploratory. So what if we could recreate that online? What if we could build systems around how humans work, individually and together, instead of how computers work, where information about us stays in our heads until we let it out, and when we do share it, it's not recorded with perfect fidelity and analyzed for its quantitative value, but its meaning is something that's co-created with whoever we've chosen to share it with. And the thing is, we can do that. We have those tools. It's not easy, we're not there yet, but people used to think that the only way to go farther or faster was to get better horses, and I flew here. So yes, there's work to do, but we have accomplished enough at this point that we know it's possible, and so we really just have no excuse anymore not to do it. So I guess let's do this together. Thank you, and I will turn it over to the next speaker.